A vet finds a dog covered in tar, barely able to breathe, scratching and pacing like it's trying to say something. At first, he thinks it's just a rescue gone wrong, but then 8 minutes later, he makes a frantic 911 call that changes everything. What did he find in the tar? And why was this dog so desperate to lead him to a shocking discovery in the woods? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Dr. Liam Carter wiped down the stainless steel examination table, the familiar scent of disinfectant filling the air. The evening sun cast long shadows through the clinic windows, marking the end of another quiet day in their small town. He glanced at his watch, 6:45 p.m. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since lunch. "Maybe I'll try that new pasta recipe tonight," he muttered to himself, tossing the cleaning cloth into a nearby bin. A sudden scratching sound from the front door made him freeze. It was followed by desperate whining that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Something about the sound felt urgent, different from the usual stray animals that sometimes wandered to his clinic. Liam hurried to the door, his heart thumping. When he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. A medium-sized dog stood there, its fur matted with thick black tar. The animal's eyes were wide with panic, its breathing heavy and irregular. "Oh, God," Liam whispered, kneeling slowly. "Easy there, buddy. Let me help you." The dog allowed Liam to carefully lift it, though it trembled in his arms. The tar was still tacky, sticking to his scrubs as he carried the dog to the examination table. Under the bright clinic lights, Liam could see just how extensively the tar covered the animal's body. As he gathered supplies to begin cleaning, the dog suddenly lurched toward the door, whimpering loudly. Its paws scrabbled against the metal table, leaving black smears. Hey, calm down," Liam soothed, but something about the dog's behavior struck him as odd. This wasn't just pain or fear. The animal seemed desperate to communicate something. While examining the tar more closely, Liam noticed something caught in the sticky substance, bits of gravel and dirt, and more worryingly, a scrap of blue fabric that looked like it came from clothing. The dog barked sharply, making Liam jump. The sound echoed off the clinic walls, sharp and insistent. For a long time, Liam tried to settle the animal. He spoke in soft tones, offered treats, and attempted to begin cleaning the tar. But the dog remained agitated, alternating between whining and barking at the door. Liam ran his fingers through his hair, leaving a streak of tar. Something didn't feel right. Was he overreacting to a simple case of a dog that had gotten into trouble? Or was this something more sinister? The scrap of fabric nagged at him. The dog's frantic behavior seemed too purposeful to ignore. Taking a deep breath, Liam picked up his phone and dialed 911. "Hello? Yes, I'm Dr. Liam Carter at the Valley View Veterinary Clinic. I need to report something suspicious." He glanced at the dog, who had finally grown quieter, but still stared intently at the door. "I have a dog here covered in tar, and there's torn clothing stuck in it. Something's not right. Could you send an officer to check the area?" The early morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Liam pulled into the clinic's parking lot. He'd barely slept, his mind churning with worry about the tar-covered dog. Inside, he found the animal pacing restlessly in the recovery kennel where he'd placed it after last night's cleaning. "Hey there," Liam said softly, opening the kennel door. The dog's fur, though still patchy from the tar removal, looked better, but its behavior remained strange. Every few minutes it would stop at the window, growling low in its throat at the dense forest beyond the parking lot. Liam pulled out the piece of blue fabric he'd saved from the night before. In the morning light, he could see it more clearly. It appeared to be from a denim jacket or shirt. He turned it over in his hands, noting the jagged tear along one edge. "Let's see if you have any ID, buddy," he murmured, running his hands carefully through the dog's cleaner fur, searching for a collar or tags that might have been hidden under the tar. Nothing. The dog was a mystery, just like its strange behavior. As he examined the animal, a memory tickled at the back of his mind. Last week's local paper. Hadn't there been something about a missing person? The thought made his stomach twist uncomfortably as he watched the dog pace and growl at the window again. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" Liam said. The dog turned to look at him, its eyes seeming almost human in their intensity. Making a quick decision, Liam gathered some supplies: water, a first aid kit, his phone, and a sturdy leash. His hands trembled slightly as he clipped the leash to the dog's collar. "Okay, show me." The moment they stepped outside, the dog pulled firmly toward the tree line. Liam followed, his hiking boots crunching on the gravel path that led into the woods. The morning air was cool and damp, and mist still clung to the ground between the trees. They walked for nearly an hour, the dog leading confidently despite its ordeal from the previous night. The trees grew denser, and the path less distinct. Just when Liam began to question his decision, they emerged into a clearing he'd never known existed. In the center was an old tar pit, its black surface dull and threatening. Overgrown trees surrounded it, their branches creating a natural screen that would hide this place from casual observation. The dog immediately began circling a specific area near the pit's edge, barking and scratching at the ground with desperate intensity. Liam's heart pounded as he approached. There, partially submerged in the tar at the edge of the pit, was a purple scarf. Fresh tire tracks cut through the mud nearby, their tread still crisp and clear. With shaking fingers, Liam pulled out his phone and dialed 911 again. "This is Dr. Carter from Valley View Vet Clinic. I'm at an abandoned tar pit in the woods behind my clinic. I found something suspicious. A scarf in the tar and fresh tire tracks. This needs to be investigated immediately." The dispatcher's voice was professional but dismissive. "We'll send a patrol car to check it out, Doctor." "Carter?" "No, you don't understand," Liam insisted, watching as the dog continued its frantic digging. "This could be connected to that missing person case. Please, this is serious." "An officer will be there soon, sir," the dispatcher replied, her tone making it clear she considered this a low-priority call. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees when two police cruisers finally pulled up to the tar pit. Liam stood with the dog, who remained fixated on the spot near the pit's edge. Officer Jenkins and his partner approached, their boots squelching in the mud. "So, what exactly are we looking at here, Doctor?" "Carter?" Officer Jenkins asked, his tone already tinged with doubt. Liam pointed to the scarf still visible in the tar. "This dog came to my clinic last night covered in tar. Today it led me straight here. That scarf wasn't here before. And look at these tire tracks. They're fresh." Officer Martinez walked the perimeter, shining his flashlight into the darker corners of the clearing. Could be kids hanging out, dumping trash. These old pits are popular party spots. "But the dog's behavior," Liam insisted, watching as the animal continued its determined circling and barking. "It's trying to tell us something. This isn't normal behavior." Jenkins shook his head. "Doctor, we appreciate your concern, but we need more than a dog acting strange and some trash to launch a full investigation." The officers spent another 15 minutes examining the area, but their cursory search revealed nothing that convinced them of foul play. "We'll file a report," Jenkins said as they prepared to leave. "If anything concrete turns up, we'll let you know." Liam watched in frustration as the patrol cars disappeared down the narrow access road. The dog hadn't stopped its frantic activity, still focused on that same spot with singular determination. "They're not going to help us, are they?" Liam murmured to the dog. He pulled out his phone and began systematically photographing everything. Close-ups of the scarf, the tire tracks with a ruler placed beside them for scale, and wide shots of the entire clearing. He paid special attention to the specific area the dog kept returning to, noting disturbed vegetation and what appeared to be recent ground disturbance. Back at the clinic that evening, Liam sat at his computer, the dog finally resting at his feet. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he searched through recent news reports. On the third page of results, his heart skipped a beat. "Emily Matthews, 24, last seen Monday evening," the headline read. According to the article, Emily had been driving home from work when she disappeared. Her last known location was less than a mile from the forest where the tar pit was located. Liam leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. The timing matched perfectly. Emily had vanished 3 days ago, right around when the dog must have encountered whatever happened at the tar pit. He clicked through to another article, finding a photo of Emily. She was wearing a denim jacket similar to the scrap of fabric he'd pulled from the dog's fur. Opening his phone, Liam began searching for contact information for the state police, or perhaps a private investigator. The local police clearly weren't taking this seriously, but he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The morning dew still clung to the grass when Liam parked his truck at the tar pit. He had spent half the night tracking down Grace Matthews, a search and rescue volunteer whose reputation for solving difficult cases preceded her. She was already there, standing by her SUV in a weathered jacket, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Dr. Carter," she said, extending her hand, "you mentioned something about unusual dog behavior and possible evidence?" The dog, which had been quietly observing from the back of Liam's truck, perked up at the sound of their voices. Liam let it out and immediately headed toward its familiar spot near the pit. "I've got the photos here," Liam said, pulling out his phone. "The dog came to my clinic 2 nights ago, covered in tar. Since then, it's been fixated on this area." Grace studied the images carefully, her expression shifting from polite skepticism to focused interest. "These tire tracks," she said, looking up. "They show a specific tread pattern, and the depth suggests a heavier vehicle, probably a truck." She walked the perimeter of the pit, her trained eyes catching details Liam had missed. The dog followed close behind as if recognizing an ally. Grace stopped occasionally to examine broken twigs and displaced leaves, taking photographs with a professional camera. "There," she said, pointing to what looked like ordinary undergrowth to Liam. "See how the vegetation is bent? Something, or someone, moved through here recently." The dog suddenly lunged forward, pulling at its leash with renewed energy. Grace nodded at Liam. "Let's follow its lead." They pushed through the dense foliage, Grace marking their path with small flags. The dog moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to ensure they were following. About 50 yards in, Grace held up her hand. "Look at this," she said, carefully picking up a scrap of denim caught on a thorny bush. "Similar to what you found in the tar." She bagged it as evidence before continuing. The trail became more distinct as they proceeded. Grace pointed out subtle signs: disturbed soil, broken branches at shoulder height, and what appeared to be partial footprints in patches of soft earth. After another 100 yards, they reached a clearing where the ground showed clear signs of disturbance. Long marks scored the earth, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. The dog became increasingly agitated, pawing at the ground and whining. Grace crouched down, examining the soil patterns carefully. When she stood, her expression was grave. "Dr. Carter, this is definitely suspicious activity. These marks are consistent with something being dragged, and the timeline matches the missing person case you mentioned." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling in some favors with the state police. This needs to be investigated properly." She looked at Liam and the dog. "And I'd like to keep working with you both on this. That dog's instincts are remarkable, and we might need them again." The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Liam and Grace sat across from Detective Morgan, a stern-faced man with graying temples. On the desk between them lay their carefully collected evidence in clear plastic bags. "A scarf, some tire tracks, and disturbed vegetation," Detective Morgan said, his voice flat. "That's what you're bringing me?" Grace leaned forward, spreading out the photographs she'd taken. "These aren't just random tracks, Detective. The pattern shows systematic movement through that area. And look at how the drag marks align with the timeline of Emily's disappearance." The dog, which they'd brought along, sat alertly by Liam's chair, its eyes fixed on the detective. Every few minutes it would let out a low whine. "Dogs can sense things we can't," Liam added, his hand automatically reaching down to reassure the animal. "This one has been consistent in its behavior since the moment it showed up at my clinic." Detective Morgan sighed, shuffling the photos back into a pile. "Look, I understand you're both concerned, but we need more than a dog's behavior and some marks in the dirt to justify a full investigation." Grace straightened in her chair, her jaw set with determination. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through contacts. "I know people in 3 different search and rescue units within 50 miles. They're trained professionals who can help us cover more ground." "We're losing valuable time," Liam said, his voice quiet but firm. "If Emily is out there—" "I'll tell you what," Detective Morgan interrupted, holding up his hand. "If you can get your search and rescue teams to volunteer their time, I'll assign 2 officers to assist. But that's all I can spare right now." Grace was already typing messages on her phone. "I can have a team ready by morning. We'll need to start at first light to make the most of the daylight hours." Outside the station, Grace turned to Liam. "It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. My team from Cedar Ridge is already on board, and they're bringing tracking equipment." The dog paced between them, letting out sharp, insistent barks that echoed across the parking lot. Liam watched it with growing appreciation. "You know, I never thought I'd be involved in something like this. But this dog—" He shook his head, wondering at how quickly life could change. "Meet me at the tar pit at 6 a.m., Grace said, checking her watch. "We'll do this properly, with or without full police support." Later that evening, as Liam locked up the clinic, he paused to watch the dog settling into its temporary bed in the recovery room. The animal had refused to leave his side since that first night, and despite the stress of the situation, Liam found himself grateful for its presence. He'd even started thinking of names for it, though he kept pushing that thought aside until they resolved the current crisis. "Get some rest," he told the dog softly. "We've got an early start tomorrow." The dog lifted its head, gave a quiet woof, and curled up tighter in its bed. Liam couldn't help but smile, despite his concerns about what the morning might bring. The morning air was crisp as Liam and Grace gathered with the search team at the tar pit. The dog strained against its leash, tail wagging with renewed energy as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees. "We'll split into 3 groups," Grace announced, gesturing to the team of 8 volunteers. "Keep your radios on Channel 3 and document everything you find, no matter how small." The dog led Liam and Grace down the familiar trail, its nose working overtime as it pulled them deeper into the woods. The rest of the team spread out in a coordinated pattern, their bright orange vests visible through gaps in the vegetation. "The ground's softer here," Grace noted, crouching to examine a depression in the earth. "Someone's been through recently." The dog suddenly stopped, hackles rising as it let out a low growl. 2 men stepped out from behind a cluster of trees, wearing dark uniforms with no visible company logos. The taller one crossed his arms, his stance aggressive. "This is private property," he announced. "You need to clear out immediately." The second man moved to block their path back to the trail. "We're security for Mr. Richardson. He doesn't appreciate trespassers on his land." Grace maintained her composure, subtly positioning herself between Liam and the men. "We're conducting an official search with police approval. I can show you our documentation." As she spoke, Liam noticed dark smears on the taller man's boots, fresh tar that matched what he'd cleaned off the dog days earlier. Grace caught his eye and tapped her phone discreetly. Liam pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages while snapping several photos of the men and their mud-splattered pickup truck partially visible through the trees. "Documentation or not, you're leaving now," the taller man insisted, taking a step forward. The dog growled louder, positioning itself protectively in front of Liam and Grace. "We'll go," Grace said calmly, reaching for her radio. "Team, fall back to the rendezvous point. Areas marked as private property." Back at the police station that afternoon, Detective Morgan scrolled through the photos on Liam's phone with obvious disinterest. "So they asked you to leave private property. That's their right." "Look at the truck," Grace insisted, pointing to the image. "Black pickup, custom brush guard, dent in the passenger door." The detective's expression shifted as he enlarged the photo. He pulled a file from his desk and compared it to a witness statement. "This matches the vehicle description from the night Emily disappeared." He looked up at them, his earlier dismissiveness replaced with focused attention. "I'll get a warrant. We need to know who these men are and what they're doing out there." The evening sun cast long shadows across the clinic floor as Liam gently cleaned the dog's paws, checking for any remaining traces of tar. Despite his gentle touch, the dog couldn't settle, pacing between the examination table and the window that faced the darkening forest. "Easy there, buddy," Liam murmured, watching the dog's anxious movements. His own mind wouldn't quiet either, replaying the confrontation with the security guards over and over. The memory of their threatening stance and the tar-stained boots made his stomach twist. His phone buzzed, Grace's name lighting up the screen. "I've got good news," she said without preamble. "My search and rescue team from the next county is joining us tomorrow. They're bringing tracking equipment and 2 more dogs." "That's fantastic," Liam replied, relief washing over him. "How many people?" 6 experienced searchers. They've worked missing persons cases before." The dog's ears perked up at the sound of Grace's voice through the speaker. It padded over to Liam, resting its head on his knee as he sat in his office chair. "There's more," Grace continued, her voice dropping lower. "I did some digging on Richardson, the landowner those men mentioned. His company's been cited 3 times in the past 2 years for illegal waste disposal. One case involved industrial chemicals being dumped in protected wetlands." Liam sat up straighter. "The tar pit." "Exactly. I don't think it's just an abandoned site. Something bigger is going on out there, and I bet those men know exactly what it is." They spent the next hour planning the search grid for tomorrow. Grace suggested splitting into 4 teams of 3, each taking a different quadrant around the tar pit. "We'll coordinate by radio," she explained. "My team's bringing extra equipment, proper protective gear in case we need to get closer to that pit." As they finished mapping out the details, Liam felt his chest tighten with conflicting emotions. They were finally making progress, but the weight of what they might discover pressed heavily on his shoulders. "We'll find her, Liam," Grace said softly, seeming to sense his unease. "We've got the right people, the right equipment, and most importantly, we've got this dog's instincts to guide us." After ending the call, Liam went through his closing routine at the clinic, double-checking the medications were secured and the equipment properly stored. The dog followed him silently from room to room, no longer pacing but watching his every move with intense focus. At the front door, Liam paused to set the security alarm. The dog sat perfectly still beside him, its eyes fixed on the tree line visible through the glass. The forest looked darker than usual, its shadows deeper and more mysterious. Liam pulled out his keys, the familiar jingle, doing nothing to dispel the heaviness in the air. The morning mist clung to the trees as the search team assembled near the tar pit. The first rays of sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, casting everything in a gray-green glow. Liam watched as Grace distributed radio equipment and evidence collection kits to each three-person team. "Remember, document everything before you touch it," Grace instructed, her voice carrying the authority of years of experience. "Photos first, then bag and tag. Mark your GPS coordinates for each find." The dog stood alert at Liam's side, its body trembling with nervous energy. As soon as Grace finished briefing the teams, it pulled hard on the leash, leading them back to the hidden trail they'd discovered earlier. "It's different today," Liam said quietly to Grace as they followed the dog. "More urgent." Grace nodded, her eyes scanning the ground. "The rest of the teams will work the grid pattern we planned. We'll follow your friend here. Its instincts haven't steered us wrong yet." They pushed deeper into the woods, the sounds of the other search teams fading behind them. The dog moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to sniff the air before continuing with determination. About 20 minutes into their search, Grace held up her hand. "There!" She pointed to something glinting in the dirt. Kneeling down, she carefully photographed and collected a small gold earring, its surface scratched but recognizable. Liam's throat tightened. "That matches the description from Emily's missing person report." Before Grace could respond, the dog barked sharply and darted forward, nearly pulling the leash from Liam's grip. A few yards ahead, they found a broken phone screen, its edges dirty, but the glass still intact enough to show spiderweb cracks across its surface. The dog circled an area near the phone, its barking becoming more intense. Grace crouched down, examining the ground carefully. "Look at these marks," she said, pointing to faint lines in the dirt. "Something, or someone, was dragged through here." They followed the drag marks, documenting everything with photos and GPS coordinates. The trail led them toward the edge of the forest, where the ground began to slope downward. The dog's excitement grew with each step until they reached the edge of a steep ravine. Grace approached the edge cautiously, her experienced eyes taking in every detail. "The earth is disturbed here," she said, pointing to an area where the soil had been torn away. "These marks. Someone either fell or was pushed." Liam felt his heart racing as he looked down into the shadowy depths of the ravine. The dog stood at the edge, barking frantically, its entire body rigid with tension. Grace pulled out her radio. "Base, this is Team 1. We need climbing equipment at our location immediately. We found signs of a possible fall into the ravine at these coordinates." She rattled off the numbers from her GPS unit, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. The early morning sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the rescue equipment being laid out near the ravine's edge. The search team worked methodically, securing anchor points and testing the strength of each rope. The dog paced back and forth along the rim, its barking growing more insistent with each passing minute. Grace double-checked her harness while Liam adjusted his own, his hand slightly shaking, despite his attempts to remain calm. "Remember," Grace said, "stay close to the wall and test each foothold before putting your weight on it." The dog's whining reached a fever pitch as Grace began her descent. She moved with practiced efficiency, finding secure positions as she made her way down the steep incline. Liam followed more cautiously, his breath coming in short bursts as loose rocks clattered beneath his feet. The temperature dropped noticeably as they descended deeper into the ravine. The sounds of the search team above grew faint, replaced by the hollow echo of water dripping somewhere in the distance. The walls of the ravine loomed over them, steep and imposing. When they reached the bottom, Grace immediately began scanning the area with her flashlight. The beam caught signs of disturbance everywhere. Broken branches snapped at odd angles, pieces of fabric caught on thorny bushes, and clear scuff marks in the dirt that told a story of someone being dragged. "Over here," Grace called softly, pointing to a particularly disturbed area. As they moved closer to investigate, a weak cry echoed through the ravine. "Help! Please!" The sound was barely above a whisper, but it spurred them into action. Grace took point, moving carefully through the debris, while Liam followed, his heart pounding. The dog, which had somehow made its way down a gentler slope, suddenly appeared beside them, no longer barking, but walking with purpose. They rounded a bend in the ravine and found her. Emily lay half buried under fallen branches and debris, her face pale and dirty, her clothes torn. Her eyes were open but glazed with exhaustion and pain. Grace immediately reached for her radio. "Base, this is Team 1. We found Emily. We need immediate medical evacuation at our location. Patient is conscious but requires immediate medical attention. Over." Liam knelt beside Emily, careful not to move her. "You're safe now," he said softly, taking her hand. "We're going to get you out of here." Emily's fingers weakly squeezed his. "The dog," she whispered. "It found me, kept coming back." The dog settled down beside Emily, pressing its warm body against her side. Its tail wagged gently as it watched over her with protective eyes, finally at peace now that its mission was complete. The rescue team worked with practiced precision, securing Emily to the stretcher and carefully managing her ascent from the ravine. Liam walked alongside, his hand occasionally brushing the stretcher to let her know she wasn't alone. The dog followed close behind, its protective instinct still evident in every step. "Can you tell me what happened?" Liam asked softly, keeping his voice gentle and steady. Emily's voice came out weak and raspy. "They grabbed me when I was taking photos near the old factory." She paused, gathering strength. "I saw them dumping something in the pit. They didn't want anyone to know." "The tar pit?" Liam prompted carefully. She nodded slightly. "I managed to get away, but they caught up." Her voice trembled. "They pushed me down here. Thought no one would find me." The medical team reached the top of the ravine, where a helicopter waited. Grace supervised the transfer, while Liam stood back, processing Emily's words. The rhythmic thump of helicopter blades filled the air as Emily was airlifted to safety. After the helicopter disappeared from view, Grace joined Liam near the edge of the ravine. "She mentioned the pit," Grace said, her expression thoughtful. "I bet that tar pit isn't just for industrial waste." Liam nodded, remembering the suspicious men they'd encountered. The landowner's security guards seemed awfully protective of that area. He described the fresh tar stains he'd noticed on their boots. "They were willing to threaten us to keep us away." "It makes sense," Grace replied, pulling out her notebook. "A remote location, difficult to access, perfect for hiding evidence of illegal activities. The tar would destroy any evidence they wanted to dispose of." Later that evening, Liam sat in his clinic, gently brushing the remaining tar from the dog's coat. The animal had finally relaxed, its mission accomplished. The steady rhythm of brushing helped calm Liam's racing thoughts about everything they'd uncovered. His phone buzzed, a message from Grace. The authorities had identified the men from their photos. They were known associates of the landowner, with previous records of intimidation and assault. Police were preparing to bring them in for questioning. Liam scratched behind the dog's ears, earning a contented sigh. "You did good," he whispered. "You saved her life." The morning sun cast long shadows across the police station steps as Liam and Grace made their way inside. The dog, now officially nicknamed Lucky by the clinic staff, waited patiently in Liam's truck. In the detective's office, the atmosphere was markedly different from their previous visits. Gone was the skepticism, replaced by focused attention. "Emily's statement confirms everything you've been telling us," Detective Morris said, spreading photos across his desk. "She witnessed suspicious activity at the tar pit before they grabbed her. We're looking at a much bigger case than we initially thought." Liam leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "What kind of activity?" "Late-night trucks, unmarked containers being dumped. She managed to take a few photos on her phone before they spotted her." The detective's expression hardened. "We've already brought in the 2 security guards for questioning." Grace pulled out her laptop, opening a carefully organized folder. "I've been doing some digging into the landowner, James Mitchell." She turned the screen to face them. "His companies have a pattern of environmental violations going back 15 years. Hazardous waste dumping in 3 counties, illegal logging operations, multiple EPA citations." The detective studied the documents with growing concern. This fits with what Emily described. The tar pit would be perfect for disposing of toxic materials. The chemicals would break down any evidence. He reached for his phone. "I'm calling the DA's office right now. We need a search warrant for that entire property." Liam watched as Detective Morris spoke urgently into his phone, using terms like immediate action and environmental crimes. When he hung up, his expression was determined. "The warrant will be ready within the hour. We're bringing in an environmental crimes unit to lead the search." Outside the station, Liam and Grace paused by their vehicles. Lucky barked from the truck window, tail wagging at the sight of them. "We should check the pit one more time before the official search starts," Grace suggested, checking her watch. "There might be details we missed, especially now that we know what to look for." Liam nodded, opening his truck door. "I agree. Lucky seems to think there's more to find, too." The dog's ears perked up at the mention of returning to the site, its body tensing with familiar determination. "I'll grab my gear and meet you there in 20 minutes, Grace said, already heading to her car. "This time, we'll know exactly what we're looking for." The afternoon sun beat down on the tar pit as Liam and Grace pulled up in their vehicles. 2 police cruisers were already parked nearby, their occupants scanning the perimeter with practiced eyes. Lucky jumped down from Liam's truck, hackles immediately rising as his paws hit the ground. "Something's different about Lucky today," Liam observed, watching the dog's tense movements. "More alert than usual." Grace nodded, adjusting her backpack. "Animals can sense things we can't. We should follow its lead." Lucky began pacing along the edge of the pit, nose to the ground, letting out low growls that made the hair on Liam's neck stand up. The dog suddenly veered away from the pit, heading toward a dense patch of undergrowth. "Over here!" Grace called out, pushing aside branches to reveal a narrow path. "This wasn't visible during our previous searches." The police officers fell in behind them as they followed the overgrown trail. After about 50 yards, they came upon a weathered storage shed, its metal walls partially hidden by creeping vines. "Stay back," one officer warned, drawing his weapon before approaching the door. After ensuring it was clear, he waved them forward. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of chemicals. Industrial barrels lined one wall, their hazard labels partially obscured by grime. Stacked in a corner were several canvas bags stuffed with papers. "Document everything," Grace instructed, already snapping photos with her camera. The flash illuminated the dim interior, revealing more barrels deeper in the shed. Lucky's sharp barking drew their attention to a pile of debris near the back. Liam carefully moved aside some broken pallets, revealing a scatter of partially burned papers. "These look like shipping invoices," Grace said, carefully collecting the charred documents. "And these numbers, they're matching the pattern of illegal shipments we suspected." The crunch of tires on gravel announced Detective Moore's arrival. He surveyed the scene with grim satisfaction. "This is exactly what we needed," he said, examining the documents Grace had collected. "These invoices connect directly to Mitchell's companies." One of the officers stepped away to answer his radio, returning moments later with news. "Sir, they've just arrested Mitchell's security guards. They're already talking, hoping for a deal." Liam looked down at Lucky, who had finally settled, sitting alertly by his feet. The dog that had stumbled into his clinic covered in tar had led them to uncover something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. He reached down to scratch behind Lucky's ears, marveling at how this one determined animal had set everything in motion. "Good dog," he whispered as the team continued documenting their findings. "Very good dog." Liam and Grace sat in hard plastic chairs outside the interrogation room, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across their tired faces. Lucky lay at Liam's feet, ears perking up at every sound from behind the closed door. Detective Morris emerged, his expression a mix of satisfaction and concern. "One of them cracked," he said, settling into a chair across from them. "Thompson, the younger guard, says they were hired specifically to keep people away from the tar pit." "What exactly were they protecting?" Grace asked, leaning forward. "According to Thompson, the landowner Mitchell has been using the pit to dispose of hazardous materials and hide stolen goods. They do their dumps at night, usually twice a month." The detective flipped through his notepad. "They were paid well to keep quiet and chase off any curious hikers." Liam's stomach turned. "And Emily?" "That's where it gets complicated," Detective Morris sighed. "Thompson swears they weren't involved in her abduction. Says that wasn't part of their job description." He made air quotes with his fingers. "Claims he and his partner only found out about her when they heard the search teams in the area." Grace shook her head. "That doesn't add up. The timing is too convenient." "Agreed," the detective said. "Their story leaves too many holes. Someone had to grab Emily and take her to that ravine. If it wasn't these two, we're looking at more players." Lucky whined softly, pressing against Liam's leg. The dog's instincts had led them this far. There had to be more to uncover. "What if we keep digging?" Grace proposed, pulling out her notebook. "We've got the timeline of Emily's disappearance, the dog showing up at your clinic, the discovery of the pit. There have to be connections we're missing." The detective nodded slowly. "I can't officially endorse private citizens investigating, but I'll keep you in the loop with anything we find." He stood up, straightening his jacket. "Just watch your backs. If there are more people involved, they won't be happy about what we've uncovered." After he left, Liam and Grace moved to a quiet corner of the station. Grace spread her notes across a small table while Liam pulled up the photos on his phone. "Okay," Grace said, drawing a timeline. "Emily disappeared 3 days before Lucky showed up at your clinic. The tar on Lucky matches what we found in the pit. But there's this gap." She tapped her pen on the paper. "What happened during those 3 days?" Liam studied the photos of the tire tracks they'd discovered. And who else had access to that pit besides the 2 guards? Someone had to be coordinating the dumping operations. They worked methodically, arranging every piece of information they had, searching for patterns and connections. Lucky watched them intently, as if understanding the importance of their task. The morning sun had barely risen when Grace's phone buzzed with an urgent message. One of her search and rescue teammates had spotted something unusual while training in the woods, another property hidden near the tar pit area. She immediately called Liam. "We need to check this out," Grace said, her voice tight with anticipation. My contact says there's an old warehouse about 2 miles east of the pit. It's well hidden, but she noticed fresh tire tracks leading to it. I'll meet you in 20 minutes, Liam replied. Lucky's been restless all morning anyway. They parked Grace's truck on an overgrown logging road and continued on foot. Lucky led the way, nose to the ground and tail straight. The warehouse emerged from the thick trees like a forgotten relic, its metal walls weathered, but the padlock on the door suspiciously new. "Look at this," Grace whispered, pointing to fresh oil stains on the ground. "Someone's been here recently." Lucky's behavior changed instantly as they approached the entrance. The dog barked sharply and pulled hard on the leash, nearly yanking it from Liam's grip. Grace worked quickly with her lock-picking tools, a skill she'd learned during her rescue training. The padlock clicked open, and they slipped inside. Sunlight filtered through dirty windows, illuminating rows of wooden crates stacked nearly to the ceiling. "These shipping labels," Liam said, examining one closely. "They're for a company that doesn't exist. I checked their records last week while researching the landowner." Lucky paced anxiously between the crates as Grace carefully pried one open with a crowbar she'd brought. Inside, nestled in foam packing material, were dozens of high-end laptops. "These match the description from that electronics heist last month," Grace said, photographing the serial numbers. "The one they reported on the news." A vehicle's engine rumbled outside, cutting her off mid-sentence. Footsteps crunched on gravel, growing closer. "Quick," Grace whispered, pulling Liam and Lucky behind a tall stack of crates. They huddled in the shadows as the warehouse door creaked open. 2 men entered, grunting as they carried another crate between them. "Boss wants these moved by tonight," one man said. "Says the heat's getting too close after that girl got away." Grace slowly raised her phone, zooming in on the truck visible through the door. She snapped several photos of its license plate and the men unloading it, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Liam kept one hand on Lucky's muzzle, silently praying the dog would stay quiet. They waited, barely breathing, as the men made 2 more trips to the truck. Finally, the engine started again, and the sound of tires on gravel faded into the distance. Grace and Liam waited 5 more minutes before carefully making their way out of the warehouse. Detective Sarah Martinez leaned forward in her chair, studying the photos spread across her desk. Her eyes widened as she flipped through the evidence Liam and Grace had gathered from the warehouse. "These serial numbers match perfectly with the electronics stolen last month," she said, reaching for her phone. "And the shipping labels, they're using the same fake company name we found on documents at the tar pit." Liam watched as Lucky settled at his feet, finally relaxed after their tense morning. The men at the warehouse mentioned their boss being worried about Emily's escape. It has to be the landowner coordinating everything. Grace pulled out her phone, showing the detective more photos. "We got clear shots of their faces and the truck's license plate. They're definitely the same group." Within hours, police vehicles surrounded the warehouse. Liam and Grace waited in Grace's truck parked at a safe distance, with Lucky sitting alert between them. They watched as officers in tactical gear moved in, their movements precise and coordinated. Through binoculars, they could see the police bringing out box after box of evidence. Officers documented everything meticulously, taking photos and marking items for collection. "Look!" Grace pointed as an officer approached Detective Martinez, speaking urgently. The detective's expression darkened as she listened. Minutes later, Martinez walked over to their truck. "The landowner's gone," she said through the window. "His house is empty, and his personal accounts were cleared out yesterday. But what we found in that warehouse, it's enough to put his whole operation behind bars." Grace's face tightened with concern. "He could be anywhere by now," she said, glancing at Liam. "And he knows we helped expose him." "You both need to be careful," Martinez warned. "We'll post officers near the clinic and your homes, but stay alert. And keep that dog close. Lucky's proven to be quite the crime fighter. Grace turned to Liam after the detective left. She's right. We need to be extra cautious until they find him. Emily, too. She's still recovering at the hospital. Liam nodded, scratching behind Lucky's ears. First priority is keeping everyone safe. I'll make sure Emily has police protection and Lucky stays with me at all times. Lucky wagged his tail, pressing closer to Liam as they watched the police continue their methodical search of the warehouse. The phone's ring pierced the quiet evening at the clinic. Liam picked it up, recognizing the hospital number on the display. A woman's tearful voice came through, Emily's mother. "Dr. Carter," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I needed to thank you personally. If you hadn't followed Lucky that day—" She paused, collecting herself. "Emily's getting stronger every day." Liam sat at his desk, Lucky dozing nearby. "I'm just glad we found her in time. How is she doing?" "Much better. The doctors say she can come home next week." Her voice strengthened. She's been remembering more about what happened. Today she told the police she heard them use the landowner's name, Marcus Whitney. They didn't know she was conscious when they were talking about their next shipment. Lucky's ears perked up at the sound of rapid typing from Liam's computer. Grace had sent an urgent message about new evidence discovered in the warehouse documents. "I need to go," Liam said gently. "Please tell Emily we're all thinking of her." After hanging up, he opened Grace's message. She had uncovered a series of suspicious payments buried in the financial records, regular deposits to 3 local officials, including a county inspector and a port authority manager. Grace arrived at the clinic 20 minutes later, clutching a thick folder. "Look at these," she said, spreading printouts across Liam's desk. "Monthly payments, all traced back to shell companies owned by Whitney. The officials who received them were responsible for inspecting the warehouse and approving shipping manifests." "They were bought off to look the other way," Liam said, studying the documents. "Exactly." Grace pulled out her phone, showing a text from Detective Martinez. "The detective's already bringing them in for questioning, but with Whitney still out there." They spent the next hour planning their next moves. Grace would coordinate with her search and rescue team to monitor possible escape routes through the forest. Liam would keep the clinic open late, knowing it gave them a good vantage point of the main road out of town. "He'll try to run," Grace said, gathering her papers. "Men like Whitney always do. But with Lucky's tracking abilities, we might spot him before he gets far." As if on cue, Lucky rose from his bed in the corner, moving to the window. His low growl filled the room as he stared intently at the darkening forest beyond the parking lot. Liam joined him at the window, placing a reassuring hand on the dog's head. "What do you see, boy?" Lucky's growl deepened, his eyes fixed on the dense trees where they had first discovered the hidden trail to the tar pit. The morning sun had barely risen when Liam's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Detective Martinez. Within 30 minutes, he and Grace sat across from the detective in his cramped office, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the walls. "Whitney's gone," Martinez said, running a hand through his graying hair. "Abandoned his mansion sometime last night. Left everything behind, clothes, furniture, even his cars. He must have had this planned." Grace leaned forward, her expression tense. "What about the airports? Border crossings? We've got alerts everywhere, but—" Martinez shook his head. "This guy's got connections, deep ones. He could have private transport waiting anywhere." Lucky, who had been allowed into the station due to his role in the case, paced restlessly near the door. Liam watched him, remembering how the dog's instincts had led them this far. "Let us check the tar pit again," Grace suggested. "He might have left something behind in his rush to escape." Martinez nodded. "Worth a shot. I'll have units standing by if you find anything." At the tar pit, the morning air felt heavy with moisture. Lucky immediately began his familiar circling pattern, but this time something was different. Instead of focusing on their previous search areas, he moved toward the far edge of the site, his nose close to the ground. "He's on to something," Liam said, following carefully. Grace walked alongside them, her experienced eyes scanning the ground. Lucky stopped abruptly near a thick patch of undergrowth pawing at the earth. "Look at this," Grace said, pushing aside some branches. Fresh tire tracks cut through the soil, leading to what appeared to be a narrow dirt road hidden by the overgrown vegetation. "How did we miss this before?" Liam knelt to examine the tracks. "These are fresh, probably from last night. The rain 2 days ago would have washed away anything older." Grace was already on her phone, describing their discovery to Detective Martinez. Within minutes, police units were dispatched to follow the hidden road. "Martinez wants us to stay here," Grace reported, ending the call. "See if we can find anything else while they track the road." They spread out to search the surrounding woods, Lucky leading them in widening circles from the hidden road. The dog's behavior grew more agitated, tail straight, ears forward, moving with purpose between trees and through thick underbrush. "He's picking up on something," Liam observed, watching Lucky's determined movements. "Just like when he first led us to Emily." Grace nodded, taking photos of their location and any potential evidence they passed. "Whatever Whitney left behind, Lucky's going to find it. He hasn't been wrong yet." The police cruiser's tires crunched over fallen leaves as it came to a stop near the hidden dirt road. Detective Martinez stepped out, waving Liam and Grace over to where a dark blue sedan sat abandoned among the trees. "It's definitely Whitney's," Martinez confirmed, gesturing to the interior. "Found this on the passenger seat." He held up a worn map, its surface covered with handwritten marks and circles. Grace studied the markings carefully. "These look like safe houses," she said, pointing to several locations marked in red. "All of them in remote areas, far from main roads." Lucky paced near the car, sniffing the ground intently. His tail was straight, ears perked forward, the same alert posture he'd shown when tracking Emily. "This one's closest," Liam noted, indicating a spot deep in the forest. "Maybe 20 minutes from here." Martinez nodded, organizing his team for the search. Within minutes, they were moving through the dense woodland, following Grace's expert navigation. Lucky walked ahead, pulling at his leash with growing urgency. The dog's behavior became more intense as they approached the marked location. His muscles tensed, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Grace held up her hand, signaling everyone to stop. Through a break in the trees, they spotted it, a weathered cabin nestled against a rocky hillside. Grace pulled out her binoculars, scanning the structure carefully. "Movement inside," she whispered, passing the binoculars to Liam. "Second window from the left." Liam focused on the window. A shadow passed behind the dirty glass. Someone was definitely inside. Lucky's growl deepened, confirming their suspicions. Martinez quietly deployed his officers, surrounding the cabin in a wide perimeter. The tension in the air was palpable as police took their positions, weapons ready but held low. "Calvin Whitney!" Martinez's voice boomed through a megaphone. "We have the cabin surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Seconds stretched into minutes. Lucky stood rigid beside Liam, eyes fixed on the cabin's front door. Finally, it creaked open. Whitney emerged slowly, hands raised above his head. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face haggard. Two officers moved in quickly, securing his hands behind his back. As they led Whitney to a waiting police car, Liam felt the tension drain from his shoulders. He reached down to pat Lucky's head, the dog finally relaxing under his touch. "It's really over," Grace said quietly, watching Whitney being driven away. Martinez approached them, a satisfied smile on his weathered face. "Good work, all of you," he said, nodding toward Lucky. Especially you, boy." In the stark interrogation room, Calvin Whitney sat with his shoulders slumped, his expensive suit now wrinkled and stained. Detective Martinez leaned forward across the metal table, his expression stern. "Let's go through this one more time," Martinez said, spreading photographs of the tar pit across the table. "We know about the dumping. We know about the stolen goods. What about Emily Sanders?" Whitney's jaw tightened. "I told you. The waste disposal was my operation. The electronics, too. But I had nothing to do with that girl." Grace and Liam watched through the one-way glass, Lucky sitting quietly between them. The dog's ears perked up at the mention of Emily's name. "He's lying about something," Grace whispered, studying Whitney's body language. "Look at how he keeps touching his collar when Emily is mentioned." Liam nodded, remembering Emily's words from the hospital. She said she heard his name while she was being held. There has to be more to this. They stepped out of the observation room and found Martinez in the hallway. Grace pulled out her tablet, showing him photos from the warehouse. Emily remembered specific details about her captors, Liam explained. The way one of them walked with a limp, the smell of tar on their clothes. These match what we saw at the pit. "And look at this," Grace added, pulling up the financial records. "We need to go back through everything we found. There might be connections we missed." Martinez agreed, leading them to a conference room where evidence boxes lined the walls. As they sorted through documents, Lucky lay near the door, watching them work. Hours passed as they examined papers and photographs. Suddenly, Grace straightened in her chair. "Here," she said, holding up a document. "Monthly payments to James Cooper, one of the men who confronted us at the tar pit. But these amounts are way too high for a simple security guard." Martinez took the paper, his eyes narrowing. "Cooper. He was the one with the limp." He grabbed his phone, quickly dialing. "Bring Cooper back in, now." The evidence had been there all along. A direct link between Whitney's operation and Emily's abduction, hidden in plain sight within the financial records. Cooper's unusually large payments suggested he'd been doing more than just guarding the pit. "This could be what we needed," Martinez said, gathering the relevant documents. "Good work, both of you." Liam reached down to scratch Lucky's ears, the dog's tail wagging gently. Once again, their four-legged partner had set in motion a chain of events that would bring Emily's attackers to justice. The hospital room was bright with afternoon sunlight when Liam entered, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. Emily sat propped up in bed, her color much improved since her rescue. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, but they positively sparkled when Lucky trotted in behind him. "There's my hero," Emily said softly, reaching out as Lucky approached her bedside. The dog gently rested its head on her lap, tail wagging. "Both of you, actually. I can't thank you enough." Liam placed the flowers on her nightstand. "How are you feeling?" "Better every day. The doctors say I can go home next week." She scratched behind Lucky's ears, her voice growing thoughtful. "I've been thinking, would it be possible for me to adopt this amazing dog? We have such a special connection." Liam smiled kindly. "Actually, Grace and I have been discussing Lucky's future. Given those incredible tracking abilities, we think Lucky would make an exceptional search and rescue dog." Emily nodded, understanding crossing her face. "That makes sense. Lucky could help other people in trouble, just like me." "Grace has offered to oversee the training personally," Liam explained. "She says Lucky has natural instincts that could make a real difference in future rescue operations." Later that week, the town square buzzed with excitement as people gathered for a special ceremony. Banners hung between the lampposts and chairs had been set up facing a small stage. The mayor stood at the podium, addressing the crowd about the recent events that had shaken their quiet community. "Today, we honor those whose dedication and courage brought truth to light," the mayor announced. Dr. Liam Carter, Grace Thompson, and their remarkable canine companion, now officially named Lucky, showed us that heroes come in all forms. Liam sat on stage, feeling somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. Beside him, Grace smiled proudly, and Lucky sat alertly between them, wearing a new search and rescue vest. In the audience, Emily watched from her wheelchair, her parents at her side. The mayor presented them each with a certificate of recognition, including a special collar tag for Lucky. The crowd applauded warmly as photographs were taken. During the reception that followed, Liam watched as children took turns petting Lucky, the dog patient and gentle with each one. Grace stood nearby, explaining to interested onlookers how Lucky would soon begin formal training. Looking around at the gathering, the rescued Emily, the supportive townspeople, his new friends, Liam felt a profound sense of purpose. What had started with a tar-covered dog scratching at his clinic door had transformed into something much bigger than himself. Through determination and teamwork, they had not only saved Emily, but had also uncovered and stopped dangerous criminal activities in their community. Lucky padded over to sit beside him, and Liam knelt down to embrace the dog that had changed so many lives. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest acts of courage started with simply choosing to help. The autumn breeze rustled through the trees as Grace led Lucky through its first official training session. The dog's paws moved confidently across the ground, its attention fixed on Grace's every command. Liam watched from a nearby log, amazed at how quickly Lucky had transformed from a desperate, tar-covered stray into a focused student. "Good boy, Lucky," Grace praised as the dog successfully completed another tracking exercise. She reached into her pocket and offered a treat, which Lucky accepted with gentle enthusiasm. "His natural abilities are incredible. We just need to refine them." Liam nodded, remembering how Lucky had led them to Emily. It's like he was meant for this work all along. They moved deeper into the woods where Grace had set up a more challenging course. Hidden objects with specific scents waited to be discovered, testing Lucky's tracking abilities. The dog moved with purpose, nose to the ground, stopping only to signal when it found something. "Look at that focus," Grace said, making notes on her clipboard. "Most dogs take weeks to reach this level of concentration. Lucky's already showing advanced skills." Liam felt his chest swell with pride as he watched Lucky work. The dog that had stumbled into his life covered in tar had become so much more than just a patient. Their shared experience had changed something in both of them. During a water break, Lucky trotted over to Liam, pressing against his leg in a familiar gesture of affection. Grace smiled at the sight. "You know, he's really bonded with you," she observed. "That's important for search and rescue work, having strong connections with handlers who understand and trust you." The training continued through the afternoon. Lucky mastered basic commands and showed remarkable progress with scent tracking. The dog seemed to come alive during these exercises, as though it had found its true calling. "We'll need about 2 months of intensive training," Grace explained as they packed up the equipment. "But honestly, Lucky's already showing more promise than most dogs I've worked with." Liam watched as Lucky sat attentively beside Grace, waiting for the next instruction. The dog's transformation reflected larger changes happening throughout their community. The town council had implemented new security measures around the old tar pit, and regular patrols now monitored the remote areas of the forest. "Emily called yesterday," Liam shared as they walked back to the parking area. "She's doing much better with her physical therapy. Says she can't wait to see Lucky in action as an official search and rescue dog." Grace smiled, reaching down to pat Lucky's head. "Well, at this rate, she won't have to wait long. Lucky's going to be ready for certification sooner than I expected." The dog wagged its tail, seeming to understand the praise in Grace's voice. Liam marveled at how far they'd all come since that fateful night at his clinic. Lucky had not only helped save Emily, but had found its own path forward as well. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Liam took his seat in the witness box. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. He could see Grace and Emily sitting in the front row, their faces showing quiet determination. "Dr. Carter," the prosecutor began, "please tell us about the night Lucky arrived at your clinic." Liam described finding the tar-covered dog, his voice steady as he recalled each detail. He explained how Lucky's unusual behavior had led them to the hidden tar pit and eventually to Emily. The jury listened intently, several members taking notes. Grace testified next, her expertise lending weight to their investigation. She detailed the search efforts, the discovery of crucial evidence, and how Lucky's instincts had proven invaluable. Her clear, professional delivery left no room for doubt about the systematic nature of their investigation. When Emily took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained strong. She recounted her ordeal. She described being grabbed near the tar pit after witnessing suspicious activity, her failed escape attempt, and being pushed into the ravine. "I heard Lucky barking," Emily said, her eyes brightening at the memory. "That sound, it meant hope. I knew someone had finally found me." The prosecution presented their evidence methodically. Photographs of the tar pit, documentation of illegal dumping, financial records showing the broader criminal network, and testimony from the landowner's former associates. One by one, they took the stand, describing their roles in the operation and confirming the landowner's direct involvement. The landowner sat stone-faced throughout the proceedings, his expensive suit and carefully maintained appearance at odds with the crimes being described. His attorney attempted to create doubt, suggesting alternate explanations for the evidence, but the prosecution's case remained solid. After days of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. Liam, Grace, and Emily waited together in a quiet corridor, the tension palpable. When the jury returned, the forewoman stood, paper in hand. "On all counts, we find the defendant guilty." The words echoed through the courtroom. Emily grabbed Grace's hand, tears of relief streaming down her face. Liam felt a weight lift from his shoulders as the judge began reading the sentences, multiple consecutive terms that would ensure Calvin spent the rest of his life in prison. As they left the courthouse, the detective approached them. "Without your persistence, none of this would have happened," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "You three, and Lucky, of course, made this possible. Thank you." The morning sun filtered through the clinic windows as Emily walked in, her steps now confident and strong, a far cry from her days in the hospital. Liam looked up from his paperwork, a warm smile spreading across his face. "I had to come by one more time," Emily said, settling into a chair near his desk, "to properly thank you." Her eyes grew misty as she spoke about those dark hours in the ravine. "When I heard Lucky barking, it was like someone had turned on a light in the darkness. I knew then that I wasn't alone anymore." Liam nodded, remembering that pivotal moment. Lucky was the real hero. That dog knew exactly what to do from the start. "It's funny how things work out," Emily mused, running her hand along the edge of Liam's desk. "A stray dog covered in tar ends up saving my life." Later that afternoon, the clinic door chimed as Grace walked in, her face beaming with excitement. "You won't believe how well Lucky's doing," she announced, pulling up photos on her phone. "Passed every certification test with flying colors. The trainers say they've rarely seen such natural talent." Liam leaned in to look at the pictures of Lucky in a search and rescue vest, looking proud and purposeful. "That's incredible, Grace. You've done amazing work with Lucky." "We should celebrate," Grace suggested, pocketing her phone. "Nothing fancy, just a small gathering. Maybe invite Emily, the detective, some of the search team members, Lucky deserves a proper recognition ceremony. That sounds perfect, Liam agreed, already thinking about the details. As evening settled over the clinic, Liam sat in his office, the day's last rays of sunlight painting the walls in warm hues. His mind wandered back to that fateful night when he'd heard the scratching at his door. He remembered the frightened, tar-covered dog that had changed everything. The journey had transformed them all. Emily had found her strength, Grace had gained a remarkable partner in Lucky, and Liam, well, he discovered something he didn't even know he was missing. A sense of purpose beyond his daily work, connections that went deeper than casual friendships. He glanced at Lucky's before and after photos on his desk, one showing the scared, tar-covered stray, and another of the proud, certified search and rescue dog. The transformation was remarkable, yet Lucky's essential nature remained unchanged. A helper, a protector, a beacon of hope. Liam thought about how his quiet, predictable life had been upended by Lucky's arrival. But instead of feeling unsettled by the change, he felt grateful. His work as a veterinarian had always been fulfilling, but now it felt connected to something larger, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could spark extraordinary changes. The town square buzzed with excitement as residents gathered for Lucky's official ceremony. Banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, and chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a small podium. Grace stood proudly beside Lucky, who sat perfectly still in a new search and rescue vest, the badge gleaming in the morning sun. The mayor stepped forward to present Lucky's certification, his voice carrying across the square. Today, we celebrate not just a remarkable dog, but the spirit of our community. He gestured to Grace, Liam, and Emily, who sat in the front row. These individuals showed us what can happen when we refuse to give up, when we trust our instincts. Emily approached the podium next, her step steady and confident. Lucky gave me hope when I had none, she said, her voice clear and strong. That's why I've decided to join Grace's search and rescue team. I want to help others the way Lucky helped me. The crowd applauded as Emily knelt beside Lucky, who gently licked her hand. Grace beamed with pride, already envisioning the missions they would tackle together. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Liam found a quiet spot beneath an oak tree. Lucky padded over and settled beside him, resting a head on his knee. The sounds of the departing crowd faded into the background as Liam scratched behind Lucky's ears. "You know," he said softly, "you changed everything that night you showed up at my door." Lucky's tail thumped against the ground, and those intelligent eyes looked up at him with understanding. "Thank you for showing me what real courage looks like." Lucky responded with a cheerful bark that echoed across the square, tail wagging with unbridled joy. The dog jumped up, playfully circling Liam, before sitting at attention, as if to say it was ready for their next adventure. As the sun began to set, Liam and Lucky started their walk home. The forest path stretched before them, dappled with golden light filtering through the leaves. Lucky trotted confidently beside him, occasionally glancing up as if checking that Liam was still there. The woods that had once held such darkness now felt different. The same trees that had hidden secrets now stood as silent guardians, their branches reaching toward the sky. Where fear had once lurked, hope now bloomed. Liam breathed in the crisp evening air, feeling grateful for the unexpected turns life had taken. If you enjoyed the story of Liam and Lucky, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Don't miss it. Click here to watch it.